Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. My name is Joe Thomas, and usually we go into each program with a lot of planning and forethought. We've got everything arranged and all the ducks in a row. This week, I sort of called an audible midway through our chat with Ken Cuccinelli while we were talking about deregulating electric utilities. He brought up the fact that, the typical response from the electric utilities is, oh, my God, there'll be rolling blackouts. It'll be just like California. And the name Chris Horner appeared in my head. And I said, I've heard this story before from the author of Red Hot Lies and Power Grab and the Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming, never mind the ultra best-selling liberal War on Transparency. Chris, good to hear from you again. How are you doing, sir?
Thank you, Joe. Great.
So I reached out to Chris and said, you have some time to talk about things going on? And he said, funny enough, we just had a big expose on these attorneys general who are getting paid by, I guess, through a money launderer at NYU or some sort of nonprofit that Michael Bloomberg set up to hire lawyers to go after climate deniers. And you had a big new expose on that. Tell us what happened with this Maryland attorney general.
Okay, so we've found out a lot more about this scheme, and there are still some key details that you allude to that we don't know yet, but we will whenever the tax filings are due. We don't know if the climate activist billionaire Michael Bloomberg created a group at New York University to serve as a pass-through, whether they just printed out a piece of paper and put it on someone's door, and he just gave them money. But we do know he gave them, I think it was $6 million, then $3 million to hire lawyers to place in attorneys general offices, and that our own made what may have been the most outrageous and, I have to say, legally and ethically curious promise to Bloomberg, which was to take Bloomberg's resources, quote, to advance the agenda represented by this entity that he calls the Center for State Impacts. They want to make state impacts. And that's just truly, that's breathtaking.
Yeah,
and
I don't remember that in his oath of office. I wasn't there, but I web streamed it, and I don't remember him saying that's what he was swearing an oath to do.
This raises, just so you know, separation of powers issues.
Mm-hmm.
It raises due process concerns. They are, in fact, investigating parties. These two mercenaries placed in the New York AG's office are filing pleadings in the investigation of ExxonMobil. That was the same investigation that led to CEI, the competitive enterprise, being subpoenaed. It raises questions about bribery.
Mm-hmm.
We know about the application of these laws in Virginia. As you know, you can perform certain official functions, you just can't sell them.
Right.
And there's got to be a quid pro quo, and there does appear to be if you go through the documents, and we'll have a lot more on this later, but the quid seems to be front-loaded. It isn't, if you do these things, I'll give you this. It's, here, let me give you this for you to do these things. So you see, it's completely different. It's not a pyramid scheme; it's a trapezoid.
That's right. You have a completely wrong. So you see, bribery, and I think this is darkly genius, because bribery still entails somebody being told to do something that they may feel like goes contrary to what they're supposed to do. So you bribe an attorney general, he tells one of his underlings to do something. They might sit there and say, "This isn't what I thought I was supposed to be doing." They might blow a whistle and maybe leak it to the press that they're being asked to do something extra constitutional or against their oath. This way you're actually hiring people that are pre-approved, pre-packaged as to, they're already on board, as it were. You don't need the Rose Law Firm shredder or anything like that. They've already come pre-shredded for you, and just set them to work. And then once we've shut down all the climate deniers and we're able to get our Green New Deal or whatever passed, you'll be celebrated as one of the heroes of the revolution. I presume that's what's dancing in the back of guys like Mark Herring's mind.
We don't know what's driving these AGs, but the question on our minds is, what prompted them to take such a spectacular risk. And again, we may not ever get this investigated until you get the Koch Foundation to do this with a Republican AG. Then our watchdogs will stir, I promise you. And if you're not sure whether it raises bribery questions, substitute Koch Foundation for Bloomberg. It may clarify your thinking.
Guns for green energy,
Right, and we do seem to be getting what I think I've told you this story before. It was it was the year 2001, I think, or two. A Washington Post reporter. I explained the whole Enron scam as I was introduced to it, and he tapped the pencil to his forehead for a while and said, "I suppose you could tell me. I could say you're telling me they weren't that bad after all." And I said, in all of that discourse I just gave you, where did you get that? And he said, well, I mean, climate. And oh, okay. So you heard blah, 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 ginger, blah, 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 ginger, as the old Far Side cartoon had it. You heard nothing but climate. Oh, Enron good. In this case, we're getting a lot of, it seems, well, but climate, or, well, but Bloomberg. And this goes back to I'm going to put this out there so people wonder and think about, why would these AGs take what is so transparently a risk if you reverse the parties? It's no longer Bloomberg and climate or trying to make renewable energy profitable, but it's Koch Foundations and Ken Cuccinelli in office.
Right.
And suddenly you see, dark forces. Why would they do that? And I don't know this, but it is interesting to think about. Mike Bloomberg spent $2 million to get Mark Herring elected and another 700 something to get him reelected. Mike Bloomberg has made a priority of electing attorneys general since about 2003. He has two alter ego groups. They clearly are. He is the funder. And this doesn't count for whatever, if he sends money to Planned Parenthood of Virginia and then they use it to support a candidate. This doesn't count that. It doesn't count his private money.
This is his money.
Groups.
Yeah.
These two groups he created for the purpose are spending many millions to elect and re-elect attorneys general who now are falling all over themselves to say, I would like to take your resources, quote, to advance the agenda represented by this other group you've created. So you can see the concerns that this would raise if the parties were reversed, ergo that it should.
You've chronicled in your writings the weaponization of our justice system against groups where the attempts are made to go after, whether it be the government accountability and oversight, or as you mentioned, CEI, or whoever it is, and go after them and say, you're funding these groups, especially company interests. So if it's the Koch Industries or Dominion Energy or whoever, saying, hey, you've given money to this group of climate deniers and we're finding you for that. You've chronicled that weaponization as well.
Right. Now, remember when they say, well, you received support from blank, ergo you're doing blank's bidding. Well, all right, let me turn the mirror on you. I'm not law enforcement, all right?
Yeah.
That's just, I know this gets lost when, certain people bad, other people good. We'll forget that one is law enforcement. And when we, for example, seek public records, they say, oh, well, then we should see all yours. No, again, words have meaning. These are public records. There is a law, and the law says I paid for this microphone.
Right.
So they're clearly weaponizing AG offices. Can you imagine if Donald Trump brought in a privately funded assistant attorney general? Okay, that put an end to this silly discussion about, well, I'm not so sure this looks bad. It looks very bad if you switch the party, so let's just admit it looks bad.
Yeah, I think
what
that's
are
fair.
we finding?
So
we recently found, and to finally answer your question, we received maybe 90 pages from the Maryland Attorney General's Gmail account, because that's where the Bloomberg Center's director likes to operate.
Oh, again, we go back to the liberal war on transparency. Let's use a Gmail account so they can't FOIA us, correct?
Well, he's leaving it to his correspondents to decide whether to do the right thing. It's clear from Brian Frosch, the Attorney General of Maryland, that he wasn't saying, here's my official account, Buster. He wasn't forwarding them to his official account as he's required. he searched his own account and sent them to the FOIA officer when he was asked for certain records. We don't know. We do know they withheld some unstated number as privilege. We know Maryland has an extraordinary expansive view of its own privilege. We're in court over that right now. But the head of Bloomberg's group, we have numerous examples. I have one from an assistant attorney general in Nevada who is being recruited by Bloomberg, where she rightly responds to him, David, I'm responding to you from my official account. What does that tell you? Okay. So he's not writing in her official account. That's his practice. So he goes on and on with all these guys' non-official accounts. He writes to Brian Frosh, who in 2013, Michael Bloomberg endorsed in a crowded Democratic primary in Maryland, which, as you know, is the equivalent of the general for AG in Maryland. And so for whatever reason, Mike Bloomberg saw a comer in Brian Frosh in 2013. And in 2014, Frosh was elected. And the financial stake wasn't that much. It was like a $40,000 media buy. I don't know how much you need to elect a Democrat attorney general in Maryland, but it's not quite. It didn't obviously require the $2.7 million to elect and reelect one in Virginia, which is still considered somewhat of a swing.
Yeah.
So Frosh steps up, and he's Bloomberg's guy in this scheme that A.J. Herring offered to use his office to advance the agenda represented by. And it turns out Frosh is the guy. And I don't know why, but Brian Frosh is Bloomberg's original Sherpa for this whole.
So according to the story that I got here, it says that he actually.
And there were some very funny emails whereby the National Association of Attorneys General explains to Brian Frosh why Frosh just emailed other AGs after the fact. They're saying, well, look, Bloomberg's group needed an AG to do it, so we tapped you because we didn't want it to be partisan. I don't. Anyway, you sort through that. But he was their guy. We got the talking points from his DAGA, Democrat Attorneys General Association call, where Frosh was the pitch man. The Gmail account, again, is interesting because we have no idea what lies beneath now, but we have established that this is the Bloomberg Group's practice. We know that, and this is important, given that this is a Bloomberg operation. Again, I've got emails from at least 3 AGs, California, Massachusetts, and one other.
I think it was Oregon, wasn't it? Or I know
it's escaping me, where he's telling them, look, there's going to be a gun question from Associated Press, too, at this pen and pad we arranged. So it's a Bloomberg group. I know it's a state impact climate group, but it's a Bloomberg group. They're pushing gun control and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, these early emails with Brian Frosh show that this New York University Center, in fact, they report back to Bloomberg Philanthropies in detail every 2 weeks, and they forwarded their first 2 reports to Brian Frosh's Gmail account, so we can see them. And they talk about the various services they're performing for these AGs. It's tax counsel, it's lobbying counsel, it's getting the latest intelligence from renewable energy investors on what they need.
Oh my God!
This back to my concern that this raises gift, campaign, and bribery questions.
No questions at all. It makes exclamation points on it more than questions. But I understand as a process, as an investigation in the middle of it, I get your point. I was just this is if I lived in Maryland, I'd be screaming, and I guess unless I agreed with the Bloomberg group.
I think if you lived in Maryland, you would move to Virginia, as so many did, and then continue their ways, turning Virginia something into Maryland. That tends to happen. Hey, this place is a mess. Let's get out of here.
And let's mess up our other place because we'll do it better.
This place is nice. Let's see what we can do.
Chris, and I will link up to the story about this at the Washington Free Beacon, detailing all of this. Chris Horner from the Government Accountability and Oversight. I wanted to ask real quick before we run out of time here. We were talking about this idea that Ken has of trying to do what they did in Texas and deregulate the electric utilities. I almost worry, though, if we break up the electric utilities, that leaves them prone to being crushed under the foot of a guy so organized as a Michael Bloomberg. You're telling me a story. I'm like, gosh, I almost want big utility companies just to fight back against this.
Well, let me tell you a couple of things. I have a very well-earned wariness of the utilities.
Mm-hmm.
For example, Bloomberg's scheme isn't the only one, and I'm telling you this for a reason. There's another group that is called the Public Rights Project or something, and it's placing environmentalist activist attorneys in state departments of justice and so on too. I just encountered this because they're recruiting to put somebody in Wisconsin's DOJ now that has turned.
Mm.
And you look at their supporters, and it's Soros and Tides and Pacific Gas and Electric, which they do. This is what they do. Utilities are largely captured by this whole climate industry, even though, well, you'll eat me last seems to be the philosophy. But in the meantime, remember, they make their money on that 11%, varies by state, but that 11% return on essentially their capital investment.
Right.
So would you rather have 111% of $1 billion or 111% of $10 billion? Well, why don't we tell the state, yeah, you need to make me install lots of expensive redundancies. We call them windmills and solar panels.
Right.
Well, in case you're wondering, why do these utilities keep pleading with the legislators very successfully to increase everybody's electricity bills? Because their money really, their growth isn't going to come in you using more electricity. Their financial success comes in recent, really decades now, in getting the state to compel them to throw them into that briar patch of spending billions on redundancies.
Oh, gosh. Regulate me, please.
So I'm wary about whatever they want. Yeah. I'm not inherently against it, but...
well, it was compelling because the dominions of the world and Appalachian power are all saying, it'll be like California in the 90s. I'm thinking, I know somebody who was around during that period of time, and I appreciate you taking some time out and catching us up on what's going on with the government oversight, accountability and oversight as well. Chris, especially with this Maryland Attorney General story, is just eye-popping to there. And I don't know if we ever get it right, but cronyism seems to be at the core of all of this, is regulate me, and then I can make more money, and then I can keep anyone from ever competing with me. So we're all good here, right?
Yeah, it's when people say, look, we operate in a free market, I say, you will show me this free market. On a good day, depending upon the sector, it's a mixed economy. It just is.
Yeah.
It would be great to have a truly free market, but a lot of these, like the electricity production delivery system, is the construct of a lot of deal making like this that has the consumers don't have the voice they ought to, and particularly in this. So and again, I've seen anchors on Fox Business say, well, but Wall Street supports it. Oh, well, why didn't you say so? I mean, sure, that's not, let's talk about the substance, not just, as I was saying, I'm not inherently against it because they're for it, but please note that saying they're for it isn't necessarily testimony. When you rob Peter to pay Paul, you are guaranteed Paul's enthusiastic support. And as I've noted, often it was Paul's idea.
Right, exactly. As you said, it's the world's at least second oldest profession, rent-seeking. So I appreciate, again, the author of Red Hot Lies, Power Grab, Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming, Liberal War on Transparency, which they found all kinds of new and varied ways to dodge FOIA requests. So we may need to get Volume 2 out there for you, especially as the AG's probe into what happened before the Mueller investigation unfolds. That could be an interesting subtext to it as well. But Chris, thank you for taking some of your valuable time out and catching us up on this week's Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening. Have a marvelous weekend, Memorial Day weekend next week. Think of all those who have given the ultimate sacrifice for our freedoms. We'll join you on the radio as well then. Until that time, so long, and thanks for all the fish.